Hello, this is Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids, and where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today I am delighted to be speaking with Stephanie Gerstenblith. Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I will let you tell the folks who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay. I'm Stephanie Gerstenblith of Enhancing Your Strengths, and I am an academic therapist, and I focus on using the OrtonGillingham approach to help kids learn to read and spell. So I work with kids starting, usually in around first grade is when parents come to me, whether their kids are diagnosed or not as having a reading diagnosis, whatever that may be, usually dyslexia, but parents don't always have that diagnosis. They're not always tested that early, but they've seen some things that they're concerned about or the teachers at school have raised. So usually right around first grade, and then often I work with kids all the way even into middle school.
And talking about this first grade, because this is a pet peeve of yours, I know, and a pet peeve of mine, which is first grade is when kids are learning how to read usually. Kindergarten, and then it becomes clear in first grade that they either are going to get this or maybe they're having some trouble. But teachers tend to wait, and parents sometimes wait until much later. And I'm just, we can say it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. But why is it a bad idea to wait to diagnose a reading disorder?
It's a bad idea because early intervention is really the way to go. That's when kids have really great neuroplasticity. Their minds are like sponges, and they're really receptive, I think, starting at a young age to learning. And the younger you start, you're gonna close in that gap sooner rather than waiting. I had a 7th grader once who was just diagnosed, and then he was tremendously behind in school and feeling very down on himself. And I think the kids who are younger, they don't have that stigma that they place on themselves. They just feel, I'm playing with this woman, this person, and it's fun, and it's just one of those things that they do, and it really, I think, keeps them on track starting much earlier or getting, not as far behind as they would if you waited for a diagnosis.
It's so interesting you mentioned the 7th grader, because 7th graders, like preteen teenagers, are so self-conscious. And if you've had, 6-7 years of feeling self-conscious, which you will starting at about, 2nd grade when everybody else can read and you're working really hard at it, and you might decide you don't like to read, or that reading is boring. Have you heard these?
All the time.
Right? Boring and I don't like it I tell parents this all the time. Boring and I don't like it are code for it's too hard.
Exactly.
And if it's too hard, we need to figure out why. So then you've got all these years of like feeling bad about yourself, let alone the skills that you then need to learn. And so, you can tell I'm on your team. I'm like, early intervention, yes. So I want to back up for a second, and can you talk a little bit about OrtonGillingham and why you use it?
Okay, sure. OrtonGillingham is an approach that it's different than what we typically learned in school, for the most part. Most parents have never heard of it until they are led on this path of either having a diagnosis or kind of in that direction. So it's very multi-sensory way of learning. So not just looking at books or worksheets, it's very hands-on. And so we do painting, and we do just using different senses. So using your hands and your eyes and your ears and your voice, sometimes all at the same time. So that's the best way to learn, is to really get that information in to the brain. So it's also diagnostic, prescriptive, sequential. It's really, we go in an order. We start just with the sounds of the consonants, and then we build in the short vowels, and then we blend the sounds together. So we don't go through the alphabet like you typically would in school. And we talk about the sounds that the letters make. So instead of saying this is an M, we start with and we make sure that the kids.
You are so speaking my language right now. I'm like, I don't care if you know all the letters in the alphabet if you don't know what sound they make.
Yes, exactly.
But we lots of people who don't do this for a living, they don't know that. Right? We are never. Most of us are not ever explicitly taught that seeing that configuration, the ink, I call it a fly speck, the fly speck on the paper has a sound correlate in the real world, like that connection, right? That's what is it? It's a sound to symbol connection, right? Is a, it's an auditory visual thing. It's not, anyway, so sorry, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, the letters, the names mean nothing. They don't help you with reading. Like saying M, okay, you're not going to say M when you see it on the page. So I don't use that. And every time I have a child spell out words, I always make it a point to remind them. And then it gets into their brain. They do it on their own. Well, I say each sound while you write it. With the typical words like cat, they would say cat. Instead of CAT. So yeah, I always do that. With the irregular words, like the sight words, I can't really do that, but we just memorize them in different ways. And also I want to mention that I do a lot with phonological awareness. So understanding the way the sounds work before you even get to looking at the symbols, like the letters. Today I used this child's really into Pac-Man and different, like we use the characters. I have a child I'm about to see who's into Ninjago. So I have little Ninjago pieces. Now I do it online. Typically I would do like stickers or little, little toys or whatever. And I have them move them around or show me, okay, what are the sounds in cat, but show me just with each one Ninjago figure for each sound. So they'll drag them down, or they would put them on the table. I do Legos. Oh yes, marbles, whatever they may be, putting stickers on paper, and then I have them move them around. Like, what do you get if you switch them, if you take one away, if you add a sound? So there's a lot of different things you would be doing that I do with phonological awareness. And even starting with rhyming, like we were talking about the early intervention, if parents see that their kids can't rhyme or they're just not getting it, like if you start to say a rhyme and then have them see if they'll fill in the last word and they just have no idea, they'll just say something with the first letter or sound that it's supposed to be instead of the final sound. If you see that as a parent, then that should be a red flag that your child might be having some phonological stuff going on.
It's so interesting because I think a lot of the kiddos who come to me, they're late talkers or they have a speech and language issue early on in childhood, right? So we're really focused on that birth to 5, so pre-reading. But so kids who have been in speech therapy, right, they spend a lot of time on, depending on the diagnosis, on learning the meanings of words without any attention paid to the sounds in the words. Now, for an articulation kid, somebody who says aw instead of r, that
my son.
Right?
Sorry.
That's a sound-based issue. And then we do work on the sounds because we have to know that wat is different from rat. Okay, fine. But if you've got somebody who struggles to name this as a jar or a glass, whatever you happen to use it for, we haven't spent any time talking about jar. We've only spent time saying, what is it? It's a jar. And so those kids sometimes have a little bit of trouble adjusting to this notion that, right, words that have meaning are made up of sounds. And we sometimes, as speech pathologists, we sometimes forget that they're going to have to, that some of them are going to have to learn to read at some point. And so we really would be best served by bringing in some of that information.
Right.
So anyway, yeah. So the sounds and the words are, and then you can manipulate them. But the rhyming is key also. I agree with you. Like, kids not rhyming, let's take a closer look.
That's like the earliest I think I've heard that they should be able to to rhyme, pretty young. I don't know the exact age, but like around 3, I'm guessing.
You've got some 2-year-olds who can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly 4.
I didn't want to make it too young. Oh yeah, 3, 4. I was gonna say, because I remember testing my son, you know, after I had been trained, and it was in my mind. My youngest son, I was like, let's see if you can do this. You know? So yeah,
it's every professional's sort of laboratory is to have their children and then be like, let's see if this works with you.
Exactly.
Super fun. So let's assume somebody comes to you when they're in 1st grade. And so they, you know, parents are on it, they're early. What's the process that you take them through?
Well, first, if they don't have testing, which I'm assuming they won't, especially now during COVID, testing is limited and not so reliable if it's done online, or just minimal. They may not get like a full testing scope, you know, everything. So I usually start with, for the really younger ones, I'll do, there's a phonological awareness test where I do go through those things that I was describing, like breaking down words, segmenting the sounds into, or segmenting the words into sounds, also into syllables. So can they clap out the syllables, you know, take sounds away, take away a syllable, that sort of thing. And I have to go with their speed.
Sorry, give an example of that, because I think sometimes we talk about these things and it can feel abstract. So give an example with like elephant, for example.
Okay, so elephant, the first syllables, you mean? Okay, so we would say elephant. Or I had a kid jumping up and down today, elephant. And if you said take away the fent, it would be ella. Or if you said take away the L, the first, you know, the L, first syllable, it would be offent. See, I even had to think about it.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I picked a hard one.
Elephant. Yeah. So, so that's the sort of thing that I would have them do and see where they lie. And I go through, I do a very informal version of it. So this isn't something that, you know, the parents would look at and be like, oh, this is a reliable version of the test. But like, I don't give a score per se, but I say it helps me figure out where to start with them and where the gaps are. And so I don't always get through the whole thing. If it gets to be really challenging and frustrating to a child, I'm like, all right, we're done, you know. Or maybe I'll do it in 2 parts. So I'll do it one session, I do a little bit, and then we do some other stuff, we do some games, and then either come back to it that session or another time, the next time. But that gives me a sense of their phonological awareness. And then I also do what's called the WADE, or the Wilson. It's a Wilson assessment. So Wilson is an OrtonGillingham based system that you can buy. The schools use it. And I will give them, it's just words. Like I put them on a slideshow, and there's one word on each slide, and I have them read it. And I start with real words where it's consonant, vowel, consonant words. So like cat, I give them those, and then I see how far can they get. You know, there's like 5 words that are consonant, vowel, consonant. And then it adds a little more difficult words, like I think it's blends, where you have like
flag.
I'm like,
well, I know, because you're talking, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I got it.
Like, give me a word.
Yep.
And then 3 consonants blended together, like splat or something like that. So, and I see how far they can get in that too. And again, if it gets frustrating, or they're clearly guessing and they're not getting any of the 5 right, or they're getting 1 out of 5, I know, okay, that's where we're seeing, this is where the difficulties really start. So that gives me a sense of where to start in the Orton sequence. And so I, take it from there, because the Orton sequence is similar to, Wilson. They go by the same, pretty much the same order. So yeah, I start there. And then if I notice the child has an issue maybe with short vowels, I'll go back and fill in those short vowels, like the difference between E and A, like eh and ah. So we really make a big deal of that, and making sure they get it, and being able to write it as well as just, know the difference by seeing it. And yeah, so I take it at wherever they are and then go back as necessary. And sometimes we just have to keep reviewing one concept and then try to move on, but also continue with one, something that's still challenging.
And
Yep.
how often do you see kids that you work with?
That's a good question. Typically, the younger ones, I'll see them once or twice a week.
Mhm.
That's usually like, I started with a first grader very recently, and we've done like maybe 7 sessions or so. And the mom came to me yesterday and said, his teacher is wondering if you can work with him twice a week. So sure. And he hasn't been diagnosed, but I worked with his brother, and she knows, the mom knows, so she's bought in. So,
And dyslexia does run in families.
oh
So
yes.
we should say that at the outset. It is one of those things. If you had somebody in your family who had trouble learning to read, the likelihood that your kids will have trouble learning to read is more.
Exactly.
And so you can be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and the parents who've been through it, they know, they understand, they're not as resistant, they're committed,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. Parents who, maybe don't have, maybe there wasn't a diagnosed case in their family. There may have been a case that they just didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
But if there wasn't a diagnosed case where a child had been through Orton or been through other, approaches, they may be a little more resistant to putting in the time. But I always tell them, the more frequent the sessions are during the week, the faster you're going to see results, and it's going to stick in their brains, better than if you have to wait a whole week and it's only 45 minutes, once a week. That's not ideal, but I totally understand if it's financially or just logistically, schedule-wise, not possible to do more. But I have worked with kids 3 and 4 times a week. Depends on the child.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in the lab, probably 4 or 5 times a week is optimal. And in the real world, we have to consider schedules and finances and all of those things. So all of that can play a role. And how long does a family typically work with you? Or does it really vary?
It really varies. Usually a few years. I've had students for, 3+ years or they come back. So I've had students for a year and a half, and then they think, and they get to be in a pretty decent place. And then maybe a year later, they'll give me a call back, or even much later. I worked with a 5th grader at one point, and then her mom called again when she had started high school and said she's having trouble with these longer words. The multi-syllable words are really tricky, and reading those longer novels in English class or whatever. So we had to go back and review, and then we hadn't gotten as far as working. There's 6 types of syllables. So when she was younger, we hadn't quite gotten to there. We had just started it. And then for whatever reason, the family, didn't stick with it. So we had to go back to those 6 types of syllables and review what are they, how do they work in those longer words, can we identify them? And that helps students break down how to read the longer ones. And so we just take it, we start at a more advanced level, depending on where the child is at the time.
The neurology of this is so important. Like it blows my mind, right? Because we think of reading like we think of talking as just something that we are wired to do. And by and large, that's true. Everybody, we're all sort of programmed to develop, human development follows a predictable sequence. And one of those sequences has to do with speech and language, and the other has to do with reading. To the extent that 80% of kids, they will learn to read no matter what approach they're given. But there's this subset of kids who, if they don't get a phonics-based systematic approach, they won't learn to read. And it's not until you get one of those kids in your sights that you realize, like, oh, this is freaking complicated. Yes. This is hard.
It's so true.
And it's typical development looks so easy.
And parents come to me and they're like, how did I learn to read without this? How did we learn to read these words? And it's amazing.
And the thing I love about OrtonGillingham and what you're doing is, you don't attempt to magic anybody into reading.
Not at all.
Very systematic, research backed, great program. So It's one of the, it's huge. I think it's a really big deal. So thank you so much for being here and talking to me about this.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share about my students and what I do.
This was so much fun. All right, take care, Stephanie.
Thank you, you too.